well, why do I still have pain if the physical injury is still, it has actually recovered? So because it's not just about the physical injury. So one of the things that happens, and one thing that people forget to take into consideration, or because of like, the musculoskeletal model of the way of looking at things, is like, your nervous system is governing your movement. So what's happening is any sensory input, i.e. information that your body is giving your brain, is being taken in, and then your brain spits out an output which says, okay, with that information I want you to do this when it comes to movement.
So Gurinder, I looked back, it was like 2 years ago. I can't believe it's been 2 years since I came on a sat, had a conversation with you and Umar with a much, much better beard than I have now. But yeah. How's things changed in the last 2 years for you since the pandemic lockdown life that we were in when we recorded?
Oh man, it was like, first of all, yeah, 2 years ago, episode 18, that's the one. I remember that as well. It was good conversations, man. It's like, caught you early in that. And, but yeah, it's like, last couple of years, man, it's been crazy. It's just like how quickly that's gone by with, just spent basically those 2 years between like April 2020 and April 2022. Just being online and just doing online coaching, and then I just started jonesing to get back into seeing people face to face, because that's where, if I'm going to get good at what I do, it's all about doing it in person. If I'm going to hone my craft, if I'm going to make the biggest change that I feel I can make, it's going to be seeing people in person, and I just like being with people as well. So it was like staring through a screen. It was like, okay, there's its pros, but it's also, there's a severe limiting factor here where I feel like I can do a lot better and do a lot more for people if I'm seeing them face to face. So yeah, finally got myself back out face to face when it was like, okay, it doesn't look like there's going to be a fourth lockdown or anything like that, whatever the number was going down. And then, just got back in, started working out of a place in Soho. Good vibes there, some good trainers and everything. And good practitioners overall, for his health and wellness space. So it was good to be surrounded by like-minded professionals again, and just people who can make you think, oh crap, I need to up my game as well, which is really, really good. It's like, it's been certainly missing for the previous couple of years. You're just working by yourself. And so since then it's gone from strength to strength again, just getting more and more busy, just seeing more people, and just, it's been a lot of fun, man. It's just like, you just definitely don't take it for granted. It's like being able to see people for work face to face. So I'm really enjoying it again, man.
That's the big marketing push at the moment, is pushing online, because it's like, oh, you can work on a beach in Bali. And I think in the times I've done a bit of online coaching, I've worked on the beach once, and that was in my first week of being there. There's never any good Wi-Fi connection at the beach, and it becomes quite an isolating job. As you said, it's nice to be around people that are going to push you up and make you better. From an online coaching perspective, because we all know how online personal training works, but how does online coaching work from your perspective? Because you're more the sort of like the physical therapist side of things than a trainer side of things. So how does it work with you?
Yeah, that was an answer I didn't have when it started all kicking off. And I was like, what's happening to my livelihood? I don't even know what's going to go down. But then push came to shove, and it's like, you just got to do something. You got to make it work. So I started, that set of clients I had at the time, most of them came online with me, which was great. I was super grateful for that. And then I just helped them through that period. And I even picked up some clients, and even a few clients from the States as well, who actually had back issues. So for those people who don't know, my background is mostly dealing with people with lower back issues, chronic or recurring lower back issues, and then just trying to, and helping them get out of that basically, and feel confident in their bodies again, and not feel imprisoned by the pain. So but it was just a case of, all right, I've got to sharpen up my observational skills, and I've got to sharpen up my verbal communication. So because I'm not there to touch correct, and I've really got to see what's going down, use just whatever I've got in front of me, and then just start building a program off that. And it was a lot more, because part of the assessment, which is physical, was taken away from me. So it's a bit more like trial and error. Is like, okay, we're going to do this because I think it's this. Let's work with that. If it's making a change, great. If not, then I've got the next thing and the next thing to do. But the great thing was, it was like, all right, it worked. I just helped people get some results. Some pretty, a couple of them specifically, I can think of, who really followed through on everything, got some pretty profound results. So it just made me go, all right, you can do this. This is great. You can do this. And so that was a good lesson, because you just, at the end of the day, you get a challenge like that, you get something thrown at you, a curveball, where the world shuts down. You just go, all right, well, what I'm going to do, how am I going to respond? And you just don't know. You don't know, but you just take it as a challenge. And that's what I try to do, which was, all right, let's just let's just get in the zone. Let's just try and make this work and see what happens. And then approached it with that, let's see what happens type of approach. And it worked, which was good, which was really good. So
do you think it adds an extra string to your bow that a lot of therapists wouldn't have? Because I can imagine the amount of people that see people on their table every day with back pain or any pain, and they got to the point where they're giving them homework to do and they're just not doing it. And they just kind of go, okay, we're just going to release something. We'll just find something to get them out of pain right there on the table and we'll move them on. Do you feel that you now have a skill set, because you can't physically do that with people, you now have the tools not only to help people stay out of pain long term because you give them things they can do outside of your office, but also be able to truly understand, demonstrate them, cue them in the way that some people that just are hands-on a table can't do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it makes, it definitely added to that, because I kind of think of like, I haven't played like computer games in like a couple of decades now probably, but I just think of like, the FIFA players, and you've got that web where it's like, your speed is excellent, but your endurance is low, that kind of thing. So if my my touch correction or whatever was good, but my verbal communication, because I could get away with not having to get good at that, because I'm like, okay, just do this, put you in this position. It might not have been as good. It forced that to get better. So then it made me think about, all right, how am I communicating with people? And because people are different as well, they'll pick it up differently. It just made me go, all right, I'm going to try it this way, and I'm going to communicate it this way. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to communicate it this way. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to try and communicate it this way. And so I think it definitely helped. I think it made a big difference to essentially what I thought was possible, really. And I think that provided a lot more confidence, and then provided more confidence in the fact that I can get results for people as well, regardless of the circumstances. So yeah, when you have that experience, I think it does help give you a bit of an edge.
It's almost like when you look at Daredevil superhero comics, right? You take away one sense and your other senses are heightened. But I remember I had a client who was given, I got all the difficult clients back when I worked in the city. Like, I was the person that if someone came in and they were diabetic or they were vegan or they had one arm or whatever else, I kind of got those kind of people. And I remember one of the biggest challenges I had was having a guy that was deaf. So I had to learn British Sign Language, a little bit of it, enough to get by. He could read lips well, but I had to really slow down, which was hard for me. But also the physical side of my communication skills, when he's face down on a leg curl, I can't cue him like I'd cue anyone else. And I take that to a client who can now hear me. I now have another tool in my toolbox to help. Like, what were the skills you learned? Is there any like overwhelming trends you learned about how to come across to people verbally, when it's cueing or explaining things, or things you learn about your communication skills through this process? Yeah,
mostly clarity, just like cutting out the fodder, because you can, and I'm similar in the sense that I can just chat, right? And I like explaining this stuff as well, and like I like making sure that person in front of me is getting it in whatever way that they can. But sometimes you can just do too much. Sometimes you can just say too much. So it's like, all right, well, I have to be even more on point with how I come across. So I better just use my words wisely, basically. Because if I'm mincing them, then somebody's just going to look at me and go, "Hey, what was that?" Or they'll just show it to you. They'll do a movement which you didn't even cue, So then I go, "Wait, what did I do wrong there?" So I take the responsibility first, rather than putting it on the client, which is like, because in a lot of cases they just, somebody who's struggling that much just doesn't have that proprioception, i.e. that spatial awareness of their body to be able to make, and that awareness of their particular body part to be able to make a movement how I want them to make it. So, but before I put that on them, I'm like, wait, how did I not do this properly? So just basically really trying to come across in a way where I'm not using excessive words, hopefully. And then if I am, it comes across because somebody's not doing what I want them to do, or they just go, wait, hang on a sec, what are you talking about? So yeah, that kind of thing was probably, that's the biggest thing that comes to mind.
I agree with that massively. I remember one of the early drills I was taught was, if you can't coach an exercise in less than 3 cues or less than 3 pointers, you probably don't know the exercise well enough. And for me, that was profound because, as you said, like, we're both very similar in the sense we can easily chat about this. And I think not only does it make it concise so that a person can understand it well, I find I can cue any exercise much quicker than I ever could now. The longer I'm in this, the less things I say. I get the setup right so they can just, it's easier to get it right than get it wrong. But also as well, I sometimes, as when I was younger, I forget that not everybody gives a shit. Like, you know, that kind of person where if you speak too much, they just want to get out of pain. They don't care why the pain science is the way it is. They don't care what the SI joint should do. They just go, okay, it still hurts. Can you stop it? And the more you speak, the more they wander. And actually, you've lost that battle. And that was the thing for me. Is like, people don't like stuff as much as I like stuff. And that is fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they don't want to hear about it. They don't need to hear about it. It's like we need to go layers deeper because we need to understand and have a few bits, like few tools in our arsenal to be able to go, okay, if that's not making sense or if that's not working, then I can go deeper and find something else that does work. But they just need to know what is it that they need to do. And that is it. It's like they don't have to know the why necessarily. And sometimes, like, you tell me your experience with this as well. It's like people who do want to know the why, they tend to overthink it a little bit too much and they're a little bit too anxious about the outcome. And so it actually takes them a little bit longer to recover because, oh, it hurt a little bit like this, but it didn't hurt like this. And I don't know what that means. And, you know, they can just keep kind of stay in that loop a little bit too much. Like, what have you noticed with that kind of thing?
I noticed that in two different ways. I think there's certainly, when it comes to fat loss, to people that tend to that want to learn, often overthink it. I was having a conversation with a client today that he was listing out about 14 different supplements he was taking. And I'm like, You've consumed about 10 beers per night on a weekend for the last 5-6 weekends. Like, you're trying to find the magic arginine that's going to make your abs appear. And I was like, how about you do the basics well? Like, stop majoring the minors. When it comes to pain and trying to get people out of pain and get people out of niggles, I feel when people get pain in the gym, they panic. And because of that, they'll focus on it. I had a client who had an issue with his shoulder when he was pressing. It's because he actually couldn't stabilize on his press, so he ended up flaring when he started to get tired, and it started putting pressure through his front delt. But he used to keep going like, yeah, I just get pain when I do this. And he keeps telling me this. I still feel the pain when I do this. For people that aren't on YouTube, that's me spinning my arm around. And I was like, I know this is generally bad advice. Well, just don't do that then. But I'm like, it was such a violent movement. And I'm like, we'll hunt while you're getting pain and we'll find ways to sort it. We'll improve your position. We'll look at other factors. But when in life are you going to spin your arm around like that? Like, if you've had to hunt for this pain, it's probably nothing to worry about that much. Yeah. Do you get people doing like that? They're when it kind of goes away, they start hunting for it.
Yeah, it starts to go away, and then you just like, well, shoulder's a good example. Is like, okay, what range can I get it in where it's actually going to hurt? And it's going to be some obscure range where you just kind of like got your shoulder in this sort of funky position or whatever. And it's like, it's rare to be there, and it's like, it's fine. And it's like, there is that, you know, people get that element of doubt as well, which is, okay, well, if it kind of hurts and I don't want to use the shoulder like I should do or supposed to, but it's just more. Yeah, that's where that whole mental aspect of it comes into it as well. Is like, because, you know, pain's more than just about the physical. In a lot of cases, it isn't a physical thing. It's going to be a bunch of other stuff which we can get into, but one of them being like that mental thing. So if you're always hunting for it, that could be telling you something about your state of mind as well. So it's like, all right, and then, you know, just kind of being losing confidence in making movements because you've got that one obscure range where you just go, oh, that's when it hurts. And it's like, yeah, but how often does that happen, right? It's like, it's a really interesting interplay between, okay, here's the physical thing, but here's like, you know, how you're approaching it mentally, cognitively, like emotionally, like environment, all that kind of stuff really plays a role. But that is an interesting thing to explore, and I think part of and in broadening the conversation, like part of the conversation you need to be having with clients as well as like the education around, like, start them off is with, you know, the broader picture about how pain arises, and especially if you've been suffering from it for a while, then it's generally not going to be just a physical thing anymore. It's going to be more than that goes into it. And so when, like, going back to that example, if somebody's doing something like that, then there's a few questions that kind of pop up, and like one of them is like, okay, if you're always hunting for the pain, like, what is that, right? And you're like, okay, cool, there's something to think about there. And what does it tell you about your state of mind? And what does it tell you about, how well that recovery is going to go? And, like, you know, the kind of things that you actually end up focusing on, because it's like, in a situation like that, that person's 99% better, but there's this 1% range which doesn't work as well as they'd like it to. And you go, you're always focusing on that 1%. What about the other 99%? Do you remember how far you come along because you were in 100% stuck to this range of movement and your pain was there? Now you're like only at 1% sucking at this range of motion, and the pain is like minuscule. Do you remember that 99% change that you made? And it's like, oh yeah, okay. So you got to like try and like broaden the perspective a bit as well. And when you start to remember that type of thing as well, I can start to take away the focus on that, just that little 1% that's left over.
I think that's why it's really, really important to have therapists like yourself who are actually into their training as well. Because there's an element that if you're only focused on the pain, and you'll see therapists who go, I'm not good, don't train because that's going to be bad, and don't do this and don't do that. You end up, the only thing you can focus on is the thing that's causing you grief. And I've seen it all the time where I've gone to a physio because my toe hurts and I can't train for 6 weeks. I'm like, well, how about we do everything from the knee up?
Yeah.
Like everything. And like training upper body at the very least. And if you can get someone to do that, or find a therapist who goes, no, we want you to train, we want you to move. You kind of go, you start to go, oh, sure, I'm not helpless. I can do stuff. And that focus shifts away from what you can't do to what you still can do.
Yeah, 100%. And like, and you know, again, it's going to be on a spectrum as well, because there'll be some people where like, you know, you watch the move, you go, you know what, I don't want you to do that until we're at the stage where I need you to where we're going to correct that. But there's other people who are like, they're generally okay, but there's this thing that's bothering them, and it's like, okay, cool, keep doing what you're doing, but just like, you know, like one of the I guess rules to follow for this individual, because again, it's going to be dependent on who's in front of you and like the context of their life and stuff. But for that person, I might just go, you know, just keep doing what you're doing, but in preparation, do this, this, and this, and after you've done your bout of exercise, do this, this, and this, and then you will gradually notice yourself improving. And and some people, and again, it's really interesting because some people might need to hear is like, if you keep going down this track, this is going to ruin you. Other people might need to hear, if you might not need to hear that at all, because that could set them off into a worse scenario. So you just have to, it's very much like an art to it as well, where you just have to manage the person that's in front of you, because some people will do well and respond well with, if you keep going down this track, you're going to ruin yourself. So you need to like taper it down, do this, this, and this, and then build yourself back up. Other people might be like, if they hear that, they'll just completely crumble and then feel like they're a broken mess. But so you just go, look, don't worry about it. You're good. You just need to understand how resilient and how robust you actually are, and then build yourself back up from there. And that's the thing. I think that's one, like that touches on something which I feel is really important. And just reminding people that you are actually extremely resilient. You are actually extremely robust, because the fact that you're experiencing pain is essentially what your body is doing, and what your brain is doing is trying to send you a signal that something needs to change, but it's still allowing you to move forward in whatever capacity you can. So even though you feel broken, is like, well, there's still a ton of resilience within that feeling, because you're still able to get on with life on some level. So you've got a ton of resilience, but you need to understand that you're at a level which is not an acceptable way to live for yourself, right? So you just want to take that signal, what pain is. Pain is just a signal for change, essentially, and then go, all right, I'm going to implement this, this, and this, which is going to improve the quality of my life, so I don't have to be back here, and instead of being constrained in my life, I've got the horizons open to me again. So yeah, there's a bunch of things that go into it.
With regards to like going back to the communication a little bit, you mentioned sort of like, if you continue like this, this thing's going to break you. Like, how do you? This is a particular thing for guys on a bet that you experience. How do you get people to slow down? If they've got their 6-rep max bench press and they've got their hardcore training, and you're telling them to pull back, how do you explain the importance of it? How do you put priority on something that they're so unused to doing and maybe nervous about doing because they're worried they're going to lose muscle mass or whatever else?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like there's like first thing is understanding what's acceptable for them. So where are you at, and where do you want to get to? So it's like basically goals, right? So, okay, I want to get to, if it is like that, say it's a shoulder problem and somebody's trying to improve their bench max as well. Just go with that example that you just gave. And it's like, okay, cool, you want to do that. So in one sense, you can't stop training because you've got this particular goal in mind. So how much are you willing to taper down? And then we'll just kind of work with that. And I'll provide my input, which is, look, I think this is a sensible amount to taper down by. And then when you get yourself moving better and pain-free, then we can again build you back up. So improving yourself gradually by tapering it right down and then building it back up again. There's again, factors come into it, is like, is there a timeline attached to this kind of goal, all that kind of stuff. But if it's generally like, I want to improve, here's my limiting factor, is like, okay, how much are you willing to taper down? Here's my input for how much you should. If that doesn't match, what's acceptable for you? And then also based on that, then I'm going to explain that it will probably take you longer to get your recovery on. Is that a sacrifice that you're willing to make? So if you do it this way, we can probably get you along much quicker. But if you want to do it this way, then it's going to take a bit longer, and it's going to affect you in this way. So are you happy with that? So if they are, then we're on the same page, and then we can move forward that way. So I think that's the most important thing first, is to kind of make sure that we're not diverging. It's not like, all right, I want to put you on this track and this is the only way to go. And that person's like, yeah, but I can't not do this thing. He's like, all right, cool. Then we're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle and understand that there is a point where if you go your way, nothing's going to change. And if we go entirely my way, then the cost of not doing your activities and not living the way that you want to live is greater than the benefit you're going to get from doing it my way, because again, it's just more than just get the movement right, get them pain free, and then push on, because there's mental health and everything else that's involved in it. So that's probably the best way to avoid that kind of clash on it, and then keep communicating about where we're at, and it's like, are we still in line? And because ultimately I do want to get you back in the gym or whatever your activity is as quickly as possible, and then just making sure that you're doing that in the smartest way possible as well. So it's all about like reasonable pace of change.
I like that. I think one of the most underestimated skills in any sort of coaching practice is setting expectations and being able to like put the impetus in your client's shoes. They're the ones that need to take action. You're just going to be there to provide guidance. It's their journey. And I suppose other than unless it's a complete beginner, most people, the problem with them, let's say their top 1 rep max bench press, if they're getting close to that limit where they're trying to push it, the problem probably isn't that they're not benching enough. It's probably the pain. It's probably the instability that's causing that pain that is actually the weak link in the chain that's stopping them progress their bench press anyway. So maybe taking a step back from bench and working on that weak link will be the thing that actually takes you through. And if you can explain that in the right way, that priority sort of shifts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. It's just like, all right, well, that's the best way to put it. It's like, if you understand this, and this is like, because it's not just like, what your pecs and triceps doing. It's like, how is everything stabilizing around that movement to make it easier for you to execute? And you want to be able to, want to be able to explain that to someone in a way which will be like resonate with them. Just go, okay, cool, I get it. And then always making sure you're on the same page, because again, somebody can intellectually understand it, but then you're like, okay, I'm going to see you again in a week, and in that week they've just bench pressed for 6 days. And it's like, wait, did you really get it? And it's like, okay, why hasn't that changed? So kind of going into that aspect of the recovery journey as well.
So you mentioned earlier on about pain being complicated. There's a mixture of mental and physical here. So I think pain science is an absolutely fascinating topic, and something that is massively evolving for something that we all think is very, very simple, but really isn't. But when someone is experiencing pain, before we delve into the back specifically, when someone's experiencing pain, what do you think is going on there? What is your understanding of pain, injury? Why does it occur? Yeah.
So going back to what I said earlier, just a little while ago, which is pain is essentially a signal for change. So what's actually happening is if there's actual physical injury that's happened, then the physical injury, depending on its severity, but in almost all cases, will be fully recovered within 9 to 12 months, right? So the physical side of things has healed up. But in a lot of cases, well, basically chronic and recurring pain is like, well, why do I still have pain if the physical injury is still, it has actually recovered? So because it's not just about the physical injury. So one of the things that happens, and one thing that people forget to take into consideration, or because of like, the musculoskeletal model of the way of looking at things is like, your nervous system is governing your movement. So what's happening is any sensory input, i.e. information that your body is giving your brain, is being taken in, and then your brain spits out an output, which says, okay, with that information, I want you to do this when it comes to movement. And so when you've had an injury, your body's going to create a compensation. Your muscles will engage around a joint in a different way than is optimal. And even if once the injury is healed, that pattern can stay because your brain does what it's habitually used to doing. So that's why you always have to have a smart training plan coming back from an injury, because you can't just go back to doing what you're doing. It's not just, I'll rest for 6 weeks and then I'll be fine. It's like that can happen, but you want to address that there's potentially an underlying compensation there, which if you continue to load in a certain way, then it's going to wear on your body in a way which is unproductive, number one, and makes you more prone to injury going forward. So you want to address that, and the way and that compensation sticks because that brain-body connection. Your brain goes, okay, this is a new way to move because I have to avoid loading that site of injury, and it creates that compensation. Then you want to correct that, and so it's a movement patterning thing. It's that relationship between brain and body that needs to be altered again back to something that's supporting your joints in a optimal manner. And that is just tapping into the nervous system. But the interesting thing about that is that the changing in that brain-body connection is also influenced by your emotions, your thoughts, your environment, and essentially the lifestyle that you're living. So like nutrition, everything like that. So we can talk about an example for each one. So like emotions, for example, is like, how does your body, like, what kind of emotions does the idea of pain bring up in you? If it's fear, then the more fear that you have and the more anxiety that you have around it is going to make it harder for you to recover. It's going to make it harder for you to let go of the pain. And you're going to be more sensitive to pain as well. Then what about thoughts? Is like, what is your relationship with this pain? I kind of ask my clients, like when I'm starting with them, is if your pain was somebody that you knew, if it was a relative or a friend, how would you feel about them showing up at your barbecue? And so there's like, there's this annoying uncle who just won't shut up, who just keeps nagging away in the corner, like in the background. It's always just low grade bothering me. It's like, okay, cool. So if you're going to be pissed off at this uncle all the time, then why don't you just go have a conversation with him and find out like what's going on in his life, so that you can put some context around why he's there and nagging you like that. And then you have a bit of empathy for it. So it's essentially, there's an element of having a conversation with your pain. And it sounds crazy, but actually when you do that and you kind of personify it a little bit, it takes the edge off of it. And so also not treating it as something that is to be feared or something that creates anxiety, and being curious about it. So if you're more curious about it, then again, it's like, okay, when it showed up, it's like, why are you here? What are you trying to tell me? And then having that curiosity takes the effect out of it, and actually just treating it like it's something silly takes a lot of the edge off of the pain as well. So there's that thought aspect. And then environment is like, well, how have you set up your environment? So because movement is such a basic, is the most fundamental thing that we do, i.e. the only reason your brain exists is to navigate you through your environment. So if your environment is set up where you're not doing that, you're not creating enough movement, then that's going to be a contributing factor. So that's one way that the environment will affect it. So you want to set it up so that you make it, the concept for me is like, I talk about a concept between friction and flow within your environment. You want to create friction between things that don't serve you very well, and you want to create flow with things that do serve you very well. So one thing could be, all right, right now I'm standing up and having this conversation on my laptop, right? So in this scenario, I'm going to be standing up, and I'm going to change my setup later on when I work a little bit. I'm going to be sitting down and punching away, but I've created a little bit of extra movement throughout my day by doing that. So how can you arrange your environment so that you're able to do those kinds of things, which allow you to lessen the pain? And then there's that other environmental factor, or like lifestyle factor, which is stress. So stress is something which we want to take on in certain doses, because that's how we adapt and become better human beings and more functional at the things that we want to get good at. But there's a level where it can go too much, and then heightened stress increases pain sensitivity. So if you're putting yourself under too much stress, you have to recognize that, or you have to recognize your stress triggers so that you can learn how to deal with them to bring your pain levels back down. And what's really interesting is, like, a good example is like a client I used to see who would always complain about having back problem, and with a back problem, it's a long-standing back problem, is like, okay, cool, like we're doing all the right things, I feel like, but it doesn't feel like it's changing. And then because I worked with this person for a couple of years, because it wasn't just back problem, it was like personal training as well. They would go on, I started finding a pattern. They'd go on holiday for 2 weeks, they'll feel amazing, and they'll come back and then everything was just shit again. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't a physical problem. This is your relationship to your life here. Like, what needs to change for you to not feel like there's pain in your body? And so it was like, you go away, sure, like you're moving around a lot more, probably like you're exploring the world, a little bit of where you're going, but you're just relaxed. You've forgotten about your like day-to-day responsibilities and things like that. And then you just start to feel much, much better. So it's like, okay, what needs to change in your immediate environment? What needs to change in your current life, which will allow you to stop experiencing this pain and bring that sensitivity right down? And so that's like kind of a good kind of an overview of all the different factors that affect it. And this is why you need to pay attention to how you live your life, because if you're that person who's like, I'm taking 14 different supplements, but I'm drinking 10 pints 3 nights a week, then good luck making that long-term change, because it's not going to happen. It's like, okay, supplement's great, but here's this lifestyle factor which is massively limiting you from making that change. We need to address that as well as these other things. So that's how kind of pain is influenced. And I think understanding that is massively missing for general population. They just think, this thing hurts, I need you to make it stop hurting. It's like, it's not just movement, it's not just therapy, it's not just as in manual therapy, it's not just those things. It's like, you need to understand the greater, broader picture, and you need to understand it's in your own hands as well. It's what you said earlier, is I'm going to guide you because I know how to spot the things that will help you. But you need to actually implement it and take it in your own hands, because if you don't have that sense of agency, then good luck also staying out of pain. So that's how I'd say sum it up, but it was a bit of a monologue.
No, it's good. It's good. I think there's something that people don't pay attention to is the mental side of pain, and in particular the response that we have to stress. Essentially, what we're looking at is if we're in a particularly heightened state of alert, right? Whether that's from an emotional side of things, whether that's from an environmental trigger, whether that's from just being stressed, whether that's sleep, whether that's nutritional, and you're not going to prioritize things like digestion. You're not going to prioritize things like you're going to have a heightened sense of pain. You're going to have a heightened awareness, and you'll see people in that sense where they'll grit the teeth more and tense up through their neck and cause issues through that. You'll see people that have inflammation and issues with the gut because they're particularly stressed. They're not prioritizing digestion. Now, I know for me, I get quite a lot of upper back pain. And for ages, I went to physios, chiros, everything like this. And I was like, why is this pain not going away? And I don't think it's entirely not a musculoskeletal thing. There's definitely issues that I'm facing. But I noticed when I started dieting, that pain often went away. So it was like, how much of that is a relative level of chronic inflammation? And when I'm not dieting and paying attention to my food, there's things that are not agreeing with me that's causing an inflammatory response that just shows up in my upper back as opposed to anywhere else. And it's something that people don't think until they actually start piecing together their day and looking at some of this stuff.
Yeah, completely as well. And like, I don't know, I can't speak for you there. I'm just like delved into it. But the other thing that came to mind there is when you're dieting and then things start to improve, because there's that, intrinsic connection between what you eat is how your body feels essentially. But there's also the element of, if you're not eating well for yourself, there's also in the back of your mind, you're like, I know I'm not doing this thing. So you always have this kind of like low grade level of like stress in your mind. And then so it just kind of shows up as a little bit of tension, perhaps in the upper back and shoulders. And then when you actually start changing your habit, because you start to do something that's good for you, you just relax a little bit. It's not even necessarily like that. It could be just a nutrition element. It's because you start doing something that's serving you in the long run. Then you actually just start to relax a little bit because you're like, oh, I'm finally doing something that's good for me. And then that tension kind of disappears as well, right? So it's interesting because I can't remember who said it. I think it's like Neil Gaiman or something like that. But it's like, people will be absolutely correct about what's not going right for them, but they will be absolutely wrong about why it's not going right for them. So it's really interesting.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, for me personally as well, this is why I have a coach as well. I use somebody. I think you know who he is as well, Chris Knott. So Chris Knott, Anthropometrics is his company. Like, so he's excellent at the biomechanics and the bodybuilding and strength training and stuff like that. So I was like, he's somebody I want to learn from because I have a blind spot in that section. But also it's like the accountability because he's helping me track metrics and stuff like that. So when it comes down to it, it's like, oh yeah, I've got my blind spots as well. Everybody's got their blind spots. And so it's just about seeing that and having somebody else who can hold you accountable for that kind of thing will just help point it out, not even necessarily hold you accountable, but go, have you considered these different things? And that's basically part of that's a big part of our job as well. Is have you considered how this, and this might be affecting you? It's like, no, I haven't. It's like, okay, cool. Well, it will be because of this, and this reason. It's like, okay, cool. Where do you want to make the change? Like, what's the easiest change for you to make right now? And then we'll build on that. It's okay, probably here. So, all right, great. And then it just goes on from there. But yeah, that's what I also find really interesting about it is like how that all mixes together. So it's like, yeah, there's a nutritional component to it, but then there's also like, how that mentally makes you feel and about yourself and like, what you're doing for yourself and how that changes your body's response to any kind of discomfort you might be experiencing.
Do you think that's also the reason why pain science is still a little bit misunderstood? Because even if we are trying to get people studies to go, right, input this one thing and see if this is the output. People in nature don't tend to do anything in one bit at a time. Like if you come to me and say, Simon, I want to build some muscle, and I go, okay, just take 5 grams of creatine a day, and you tell me you're not going to start training, you're not going to change how you eat, you're not going to move differently, you're not going to think differently. So like you mentioned there, and I just started thinking like, okay, it could be a nutritional component. It could be that underlying stress that you mentioned. It could be the fact that when I'm starting dieting, I often also get a coach. So I'm getting some guidance and stimulated there. It could be that my training is better. So I'm actually doing the stuff that I should be doing to get rid of the pain in the first place. It's like when you add in like Himbine on a diet and it's a new supplement. You go, did the Himbine work or did I just diet longer and harder more consistently? You never know. And do you think that's the element of why pain science is such a difficult thing to look at? Because generally people who want to get out of pain tend to try and do everything. So it's really hard to say what worked.
Yeah. Again, it's a good question because there's a lot of nuance to it as well. Because when somebody tries everything, but then you look at the model of what they've tried, it's actually a very small spectrum of what they've tried. And what I mean is, most people will go through that route of, okay, I'm in pain. I'm going to go see my GP. My GP is going to say, right now is potentially this is like a kind of typical journey, but obviously there's variation there. But the typical journey is I'm going to go to the GP. I've got some pain. GP tells them, look, don't worry about it. Give it a few more weeks. Let it rest. And then you rest. Nothing changes. You go back to your GP. Like, okay, here's some painkillers. Give you some painkillers. Like, okay, cool. It dulls the pain a bit, but I'm still actually not feeling any better. Like it's not actually. I'd have to take more painkillers for the same effect. That kind of thing happens. And you go back to the GP. It's like, okay, we're going to get you a consultation. You get a consultation, like maybe a surgical consult. And the surgeon goes, you don't need surgery yet, but go to physical therapy here. You go to physical therapy and you turn up and it's actually group physical therapy on the NHS. And if you're going to do not private, if you're going to do it individually one-to-one, you get like a 10-minute session. They give you 10 exercises on a piece of paper. It's like, go do these. And you're like, okay, I'm doing them, but I still don't feel any better. So it's an extremely generic approach. And it's actually a very, very small amount, a small thing, small spectrum of what you could be doing. And then it's like, okay, you get another consult, and then it's like, okay, maybe you need surgery. And it's like, surgery is a very, very last thing. It's like, so people go, I've tried everything. And it's like, when you actually narrow it down, you go, you've tried everything in the model that you know about. Here's people like me, there's osteopaths, chiropractors, other private physiotherapists who are going to be able to look at a problem in a different way than you've actually looked at it already. So you're fed up, you think you've tried everything, but look, based on what you're telling me, there's still something that hasn't been explored. And I'll tell you, like, one simple thing that doesn't get explored often enough, and I know, and I'm pretty sure you work with this kind of stuff, is like actually breathing correctly. So even if they've gone to see osteopaths, chiros, and physios, it's like, yeah, I've tried this, this, and this, and it's like, okay, cool. What I'm hearing is like, there's a bunch of stuff that marginally worked and there's some stuff that didn't work. It's good to know about that, because then it's like, okay, we need to expand on those things, and i.e. the things that did work is like, there's a clue there that you're not a hopeless case. Basically, in most cases you're not. You're like, everybody's got a chance, because there's always going to be something that makes them feel better. We just got to dial up what that is and broaden what that is. So if there is something that makes you feel better, is like, okay, cool, there is something here for you, but we need to put a plan of action in place, because it's a bit more complicated than you think it is, and it's also, you haven't actually been through everything, because there's still some things that are left on the table. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to breathwork in a second, because I had a particular question about that. But going back to you were saying about how there's we talk about the emotional side of pain. Do you think that traditional model that you're saying might also not work? Because when someone goes to a GP for pain, if that's their first protocol, they don't know most people don't know whether that pain they feel in their upper back is I slept funny on it, or I did something in the gym, or whether I've got a tumor pressing against my spine. When they go to the GP, they're probably scared. They can have a bit of white coat syndrome. And then they refer to somebody else, which is a scary procedure. And then that person refers to someone else. You get to the surgeon, and then it's like, well, this is a scary concept. So in turn, this person's coming in like this, probably feeling more pain, maybe going to someone like yourself who is not a man in a white coat with a blood pressure cuff and going, tell me what's going on. The results are going to be different just because of the state that person is coming in on. Do you think that plays an impact?
Dude, that's a really good point, and like, I hadn't considered it like that as well. I think I think that's totally legit. And also the other thing is, and the amount of times I've heard it as well, which is like, I do a thorough initial assessment with someone. A big chunk of that is just talking about what you're experiencing and all the different things that could be influencing it. And I'm hearing it from them. I'm listening to what they're saying. And they wouldn't have been listened to like that. I literally had a guy like 3-4 months ago who broke down in the treatment room, or in the consultation room, because he was like, I've just been dismissed by like 3 or 4 people who have said they were going to help me. It's like, no, this isn't something that's a problem the way that you think it is. And he's like, well, I have a problem of some sorts and I need it worked on. So I basically sat there, I listened to him for about 45 minutes of initial 90-minute consultation. And then, he started crying. And because he's like, somebody's actually finally like listening to what I have to say. And that in and of itself is going to provide a massive amount of relief, because finally somebody's taking me seriously, and it's not just something that's in my head. It's something that can actually be worked on. And side point, if it is something that's just in your head, that can still be worked on, because there's other therapists who are skilled at doing that kind of thing. But yeah, so just having that alone, just being with somebody who's actually going to take time to listen to what you're saying and listen to your problem is huge. And I think that's a good point that you raised as well. It's like that less of a white coat syndrome kind of thing, because I'm essentially dressed how I am now. It's like, I just wear black, I've got my logo on my shirt, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Just let's talk about what you're here for. And just that bedside manner really helps, because it just helps put people at ease.
He also highlights another problem we have in, I don't know so much whether with doctors, but maybe I reckon it is, but certainly with coaches, that people just aren't willing to ask for help. If they don't know something, they're not willing to find out. So they get dismissed, because rather than saying, I don't know, but I'll find someone that will, I just don't want to admit to my client or myself that I don't know the answer to something, which it is so short-sighted, especially in the coaching field, where, I think personal training is an incredibly hard job, because you have to be a very, 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 very good jack of all trades.
Yeah.
So you can't master none. Like, I'm not wanting to dismiss what you do at all, because I think it's incredible. But at least when you're learning about what you do, you can dive down deep into what you do. Yeah, there's all these emotional components to it, but like, a personal trainer's got to go. You've got nutrition, you've got psychology, you've got communication skills. You've got to get someone to follow a diet. You've got to look at training program. You've got to have a little bit of the knowledge that you have. And if you're thinking you're going to be an expert of all these things, and I've certainly battled this, you're onto a losing path. It's only when you actually have a referral network of people you can go and speak to, at the very least, if not refer people to, that you actually start to get a better working knowledge of stuff. Because if I'm trying to learn all this stuff at once on my own, I'm fighting an uphill battle. Yeah,
exactly. And like, it's kind of, there's an honesty that needs to be attached to it as well, because we very much live in a culture of like, you need to know it all. And if you don't, then you kind of shouldn't be trying to help someone in one sense, or it's more like that person, you think that the person in front of you is going to be like, all right, you're useless, right? And I definitely suffered with that as well earlier on in my career. But it's funny, because that classic hubris of, that Dunning-Kruger effect of, you know so little, but you think you know something. And then you put excess pressure on yourself to be able to provide a solution when it's like, actually, you don't know jack, right? And you need to bring in other people to help you with this. But actually, the times it's me checking myself as well, because it's why I like part of the big enjoyment of doing what I do is it actually keeps me in check in one sense, because I go in, somebody's presenting with certain issues. Like I've got an interesting case where this person, this female, only experiences back pain like 2 weeks after a cycle, like after a period, and it goes on for a week, and it just lasts for a specific period of time. And it's like, okay, this is super interesting. So I know I can help on some level, because I still think there's, based on my assessment, there's still some things and that she can do with the skill set I have. But then it's also like in the back of my mind is like, okay, if this stops working, then I know there's a hormonal component. I know there's this stuff. I know there's people who I could refer her on to, which she hasn't seen already and she hasn't been exposed to already, which will be the next part of the track for me. So I've got that in the back of my mind, because I'm like, okay, this is definitely could venture into territory which I have no grounding in, because hormones, for example, as much as we like to think we know about them, are just like super complicated, right? How they interact with the whole system. So there's things like that. And then, but then there's also, you very much live by like, I'm always learning. I always want to evolve. So if by definition, that means I'm never going to know everything. So I'm always like, and this is what's also beautiful about coming back, seeing people face to face, because I have them presenting their problems right in front of me, and it's like, okay, cool, I'm helping. And then I might hit a wall because somebody does something or presents a certain way. I'm like, I'm not entirely sure. So I have people who I can speak to about this kind of thing. I have my mentors as well, right? So because at the end of the day, you have a problem. If you say you don't know, you're going to know how to fix it the next time it comes up, because in theory, it's like, okay, I don't know. I'm going to work on knowing about this. And then the next time this comes across, there's a little bit less that I don't know. But then the other thing is that whole, I don't know, I fix that has brought along about 3, 4, 5 other questions as well, right? About what you actually don't know. But yeah, the point being is if you have that attitude, I feel like it allows you to actually do better service for your clients, because you're able to learn about that problem so that it's never an issue again for the next person that you see. And yeah, so just making sure you have those like kind of mentors in place where you can just ask them questions, and just people like, you and I, like we can just get together and just have a conversation and be like, what do you think of this? Or what do you think of that? And we may not, sometimes it might be blind leading the blind, but in a way, at least it's giving you a bunch of questions that you need answers to, so you can go and actually take it to somebody who's way smarter than you are.
I agree with that. That's why I don't think imposter syndrome is a bad thing. Everyone talks about imposter syndrome being a terrible thing. I don't like it called a syndrome either, because they're comparing it to something that is actually a mental illness. But like it's something that if we didn't have it, we wouldn't keep pushing. And I think the reason why we get better over time is because we have that little bit of inadequacy is what keeps a bit of fire alive. And I think that's really important. So cycling back to breath work, because you mentioned it earlier on, I sort of want to bring this into the segue of talking about lower back pain. It's a bit of a buzzword in the industry now. It went from mechanics, now everyone's talking about breath work, right, over the last few years. And I think for good reason. Like, I think, this, if you look at from the lower body, there's a fascial attachment from the psoas into the diaphragm. And if you can't expand your rib cage, then good luck having good mobility of the shoulder. In theory, on paper, unbelievably important to improve someone's breath work. But how applicable do you reckon breath work stuff actually is? Because the way I often think about it is the amount of times we take a breath in a day. Your bad reps always outweigh your good reps. It's like trying to have a piss in the ocean and trying to make it yellow. So you mentioned breath work. Obviously, but I assume you mentioned it because it's something you help with your clients. What power do you have, and how do you overcome the fact that their bad breaths are always going to be more than their good breaths?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good question. And the way it is just it's just repetition. It's just like time in the game. So it's like when you become aware of it, then you have a better chance of creating more good repetitions. And again, it's not a battle that's won on day one. It's like, oh, I've taken 25,000 breaths a day. I managed to do 1 good breath today. That's fine. Tomorrow will be 2. Next day will be 4. And you'll keep building. So it's because, first of all, it starts with that awareness. It's like, okay, I'm aware I'm doing that now. Now I need to regulate my breathing. And where it's interesting is also because that can be done in different ways, right? So the other thing is like when you genuinely tap into that brain body connection, right? That information into the brain and the brain spitting out an output. When you get that mapped on properly again with good movement pattern training, then you're able to more automatically take better breaths as well. So when we are coaching and cueing somebody to do a core exercise with appropriate breathing, because of that kind of, it's like that adaptation that somebody gets. It's very similar in a way to the adaptation that somebody's going to get from like doing squats. Basically, you might squat like twice a week, but your legs are still going to grow, even though the rest of the time you're probably like sitting down, for example. Whereas here it's the similar sort of thing. If you get the coaching right, you get the cueing right, and you get that person just to practice it as often as they can on a regular basis, then gradually it starts to become a thing where it becomes more and more of a pattern, because that's what the brain starts to get used to. So it's very much a skill that can be learned. It's also it's innate to be able to breathe well like that, but it's just a lot of that, lifestyle factors, everything that we kind of like take on in our lives, everything that fills our bucket, can change that patterning. Our posture is a big one. So one of my mentors, Kathy Dooley, who's she runs this company called Immaculate Dissection, which is just basically she's teaching anatomy to professionals like us. It's fantastic. It's at a level which I haven't had exposure to before. And she's a world-class anatomist. Has dissected 2,500 bodies or something, and then her and her colleagues are just teaching anatomy in this way. And I met her through neurokinetic therapy and studying with her and learning from her from that. And the phrase she uses when it comes to understanding breathing a little bit more is C3, C4, C5 keeps the diaphragm alive, right? So it's a really nice little rhyme. Basically, what that means is the vertebrae in the neck, those three segments, that's where one of the nerves that goes directly to the diaphragm is coming out of. And so then because that goes up into the brainstem, your breathing is giving you kind of real-time information to your brain about your state of being. So if you're...
That'd be the vagus nerve?
No, it's the phrenic nerve.
Phrenic nerve, okay.
Yeah, so the actual sensory and motor control of the diaphragm. So if for people who are watching on YouTube, if I'm kind of stuck in this posture where I've got my, but people who aren't watching, if I've got my chin out and my neck is compressed, then I'm compressing on that region, and my breathing capacity is limited because I'm not sending a good signal to my diaphragm, which is that primary muscle of breathing, which sits underneath the rib cage or within the rib cage, to actually function properly. Whereas if I improve my posture, then my breathing automatically improves in function. So taking care of those kind of fundamentals is like learning how to use your body better will automatically improve your breathing. We talked about stress earlier as well. So if you take kind of a stress out of your system, you automatically learn how to improve your breathing. And you can actually use your breath to change your state of stress as well, because we're talking about how your brain is basically picking up information from your breathing to tell you to understand whether it should be in a stress state or whether it should be in a relaxed state. So if you're kind of shallow breathing, constantly breathing a lot, because you have poor breathing mechanics, then you're always going to be in a state of stress, because breathing heavy or breathing fast or breathing shallow is associated with stress. So your brain just goes, okay, I'm in a stress state. Whereas if you just regulate your breathing and just slow it right down, your brain goes, oh, I'm relaxed, nothing intense is going on. And then because you relax, you improve your breathing mechanics as well. So there's all these different ways that you can influence it, and that can start to over time outweigh the bad reps. And then you start to pay more attention because you know what a good breath feels like. You're like, oh shit, this is a bad breath. So that awareness kind of is a bit of a feedback loop as well. And so it's just basically getting people to do fundamental things better and better and better, and they will start to improve that breathing function as well over time.
So would you look at adding something like a quicker fix band for your butt exercise along with the breathing thing? No, that's going to take a very, very long time to sort somebody's pain. So for sake of argument, you mentioned C2, C3, C4, so all C3, 4, 5. Use that from life, right? C3. Yeah. So if someone's coming in with that forward head posture, if sorting that would allow them to make them breathe easier very quickly, I'm sure that's something of a relative priority for you if that's the case. How would you get somebody in that position? What kind of things would you get them to do to improve their position of the head?
Yeah, so again, it's going to depend on how, so I'll caveat that with, that might be the position that they present with, but it might not necessarily be an issue coming from the neck, right? So it could actually be a core issue. So if we end up working on the core, then that neck posture automatically starts to improve as well. But for the sake of argument, just keeping it really simple is if that is the thing, then one of the things I'd get somebody to do is, especially if they're sedentary, we want to do two things. We want it to be something where there's a pattern that they're training, and the second thing is we want their lifestyle to try and support that new pattern as much as possible. So if there's somebody who's sedentary a lot of the time, what tends to be the case is you're punching away on a laptop or a computer and you're looking down a lot of the time. So if that's going to be the case, then yeah, you're always fighting almost a losing battle all the time, because your head's just going to be in that down position all the time, maybe chin out a little bit. So you want to, number one is environment, just raise that level that you're looking at your screen, and then that straightens you out. So you're looking more directly ahead of you rather than looking down all the time. So that's number one, is one of the things that you can do. I won't actually put any kind of prioritize the order of it, but that's one of the things that you can do. And the second, the other thing is basically doing some drills which will help you improve that neck long position. So a simple thing is go neck long, chin tuck. And when you do that, you're starting to activate what you can call as the neck stabilizes at the front, and it's getting some length in the back of the neck, and then that just helps you to improve. And a couple other things you can add to that as well is it's quite a funky one where it just feels like you're pricking your ears up. So if you feel like you're trying to prick your ears up, it's automatically lengthens out your neck. If you get your tongue to, I just saw you do it there. You're oh, that worked. And then tongue to the roof of the mouth, you get your middle of your tongue and press it to the roof of the mouth, and that also helps to lengthen things out. And that can be a bit of a workout for the neck. In the same way you would think I'm doing a core workout, you're I'm doing a core workout in inverted commas. Is that the word? For your neck, and then because you've improved the function there, that'll stick around for longer and longer. So yeah, that's something, for example, that you could be doing.
On that note, do you think I'm sure you must have seen those? They seem like a weighted ball gag that people put in their mouths to tone up their jaw. Have you seen those things? Are you saying that these things actually do have a place?
That's a good question. I hadn't even thought of that. It's they could have a place because, again, heavy caveat. It depends on what your presentation is, how your symptoms and what the actual cause of them. Because for a lot of people, doing jaw work I'm saying for a lot of people in the context of a high-paced city lifestyle, like I have in London here, most people carry a lot of tension in their jaw, and they're kind of biting down in the jaw a little bit, and without really noticing it. But a lot of people will grind their teeth at night and that kind of thing. If they're going to use that, that's just going to make their symptoms worse. It's not actually going to help them out. Then some people might have a weakness, a genuine motor control weakness in the jaw, whereas that can be an exercise that you can actually do, which will help to improve your jaw function. But again, it's just going to depend on whether I know people are doing it for the aesthetic, and it's yeah, you could be really trashing how your neck and jaw and everything functions, and actually putting a heightened state of stress, and actually you can knock out your core as well. So it's just going to depend, but there could be a place for it.
When you said core earlier on could be the reason why somebody has issues with the neck and in turn the diaphragm, are we looking at sort of anterior tilt push you forward away from your center of mass, so in turn you have to overextend the spine, which means you've got a flared rib cage, and you sort of do this sway back and forward until you find that position at the top of the head? Is that sort of what you're referring to when it says it could be if we can get yourself stacked, we now center ourselves over our center of mass and our head doesn't have to keep balance anymore?
Yeah, that's one of the things that could be. So essentially the spine is just it's all every part of the body is interconnected, right? So your head forward posture can be influenced by your feet if you want to go to extreme levels, but that's it's not uncommon, and it's not unknown to happen. But yes, because of the way the spine functions, it's it doesn't work in isolation. If you created a excessive lordosis in the lower back, you're probably going to create that in your neck as well. So it's correcting how you hold yourself up will have a knock-on effect on the rest of the spine. And one side, like the number of times I've seen in recent weeks as well, like the neck influencing the back and vice versa. So somebody's got a back problem and they might present with a bit of neck issues as well. It's like there's an intrinsic connection between the two things. So it's like, actually, if we work on the neck, the back starts to resolve itself, or vice versa, whichever way that person's particular problem is, whatever the cause of the person's particular symptoms is. So 100%, like it will and it can have an influence. So and from even just like a purely neurological perspective, where it's your neck muscles could be overactive for your lower back muscles, which are underactive, and so you want to rebalance that so that your whole spine stacks up properly and moves better.
So going into lower back pain, which is your absolute area of expertise, it is one of the most common areas of pain that most people get. So in simplistically, why do so many people experience lower back pain more than anything else?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just down to, our inability, or not inability, our environment that we've created for ourselves, which is full of convenience and not enough movement. So it goes back to the idea of, body's craving movement because your brain is hardwired for movement. That's what it's designed to mostly do. And we find ourselves putting and because that's where our center of mass kind of sits, is in that lower end of the lower back. And we are putting undue strain and stress on it by putting ourselves into positions which it doesn't like. So that's a big contributing factor, I find. I think even from my opinion. So yeah, just the fact that we're not moving in ways that we could be and probably should be, and we're putting undue strain and stress on it by finding ourselves in constant positions of load in ways which are putting it into compromised positions. And yeah, I think that's a big contributing factor.
So often when you see people that have come into you with lower back pain, right, one of the things you often say is like, how did you get it? And he goes, I woke up and slept funny, or I picked up the newspaper. My first thoughts are always like, well, how heavy was that newspaper? So what do you think of, like, are the things that happen? It's sort of a reframe of sort of the last question, but like back pain specifically, what are the things that happen that lead to someone getting back pain? And what can people do in their day-to-day lives to try and prevent it in the first place?
Yeah, so generally, it can boil down to like 3 different categories. And Stuart McGill, who's like the back mechanic essentially from Canada, who's done like 30, nearly 40 years of research into this kind of stuff, is basically is a constant load, is a repetitive load, and there's a maximal load. So to break each one of those down, a constant load is just something where your biceps are a really good example to use. Is like, okay, if I've got my arm out in front of me like this and I'm tensing it, that's is minor, it's a low load. But if I stay here and I keep squeezing and I'm here for 5 hours, my arm's going to get absolutely knackered. So that's there can be a constant load on a joint or on a part of the body, which will contribute to dysfunction and then potentially create pain. So
does that come from a stability standpoint? If let's say what we're speaking about earlier on, with your center of mass being there, and if your pelvis is shifted forward and you've got the neck facing forward, and that part of your body has to work hard to try and keep balance over your center of mass, is that why there's a constant load? Because there's no load on them. They're not sitting in a back squat for 4 hours or halfway up a deadlift. So is it this difference in position that's causing this constant load?
Yeah, so like gravity in that instance is the load that the body's experiencing. But when you put when you stack yourself up in a way which isn't conducive to being able to handle that load very well, i.e., like a posture which will allow you to support that load as well as you can. If you stick your head out a little bit further than your center of mass, then the load increases as a result of how gravity is acting on us. So, and it's putting more load on a particular joint and a particular part of the spine rather than sharing that load evenly. So it's like low grade level of load continuously, and that's what's happening when people are sitting down essentially. So it doesn't make any sense for a lot of people. It's like, I didn't do anything to hurt. It's like, actually you were sat for 10 hours a day, and that is the thing that's potentially contributing to it. So yeah, that when we talk about load, it's not necessarily like, okay, you're thinking about lifting something. It's just more like, how's your body shaping up and how's it handling the force of gravity that are acting on it. And then another one is like repetitive load. So that could be something like going to the gym. It's like, I wasn't lifting heavy, but I did like 12 reps, 3 sets of deadlifts, and I did that a couple of times a week, whatever. So there's a repetitive load. So it's like you do something often enough, and that can, but if you do it in a way which again isn't conducive to supporting the spine very well, then you can create an issue there. And then there's the maximal load, which is what people mostly associate with, like, that example, like how much did that newspaper actually weigh? Whereas, so you can think of somebody just like doing a maximal lift in the gym, like that's the image that is the easiest to think about, or somebody just going to, they're moving house, they've got to pick up the sofa, and like, all of a sudden something just goes there. So there's those 3 categories that it generally falls under. So it could be just somebody who's like sedentary, getting a constant load on the body. It could be a repetitive load where you're doing something often enough, and then that's causing issues in a particular joint. And then there's that maximal load where you do it, but that tolerance for that level of, or that load wasn't there, and then it just breaks through that kind of tolerance threshold, and then all of a sudden there's a pain response. So those are generally the ways that it kind of shows up.
Do you think there's also normally most people present with a combination of all 3? So for sake of, they might be able to handle that sofa you were talking about lifting, but because they've had this constant load from gravity because they're not in a great position, they're already closer to their tissue tolerance as it is. And then that's the thing that pushed them over the edge, as opposed to it is just the sofa incident that hurt them. It's actually, it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I was just about to say that. It's a straw that broke the camel's back, and that's what happens often. If, somebody comes in and is like, oh, I felt like this, or, a classic one as well, it's like you just rolled out of bed and all of a sudden back started hurting. I mean, it happened to me once as well. I got out of the shower and then I was like, oh crap, my back, what just happened? And I can trace it back to why it happened. And that was also a heavy lesson, taking my own advice as well. But it was, it just happens, and it's like the straw that broke the camel's back type of thing.
What can people do in their day-to-day lives if they haven't got back pain now but they want to avoid it? Are there general practices? I know it can be very individual, but are there general practices you recommend, like a standing desk or moving more, or what are the things that you recommend people do to try and avoid back pain?
Yeah, so when it comes to movement, frequency of movement is king. So I'm not talking about it having to be like, you got to go to the gym like 5 times a day type of thing. When I talk about frequency, it's like, every hour move for 2 minutes. And that could just be walk around if you work in an office, just walk around your office plan, because it does a couple of things. It's not just good for your body, but it's also good for your mind. It's good for your brain, because you just need to hit the refresh button. So something as simple as that. So frequency of movement is also more important than like the volume of movement. So for example, if I say, move, you got a 10-hour day, I say move 2 minutes every hour. That's like, 20 minutes of movement that's baked up. That's better than doing 20 minutes at the end of those 10 hours. So if you just like stay sat for 10 hours and then do 20 minutes of movement, it's like, well, actually it's still something, but it's not as good for you as if you just frequently moved through that time. But if that's all you can do, like, I would definitely say always pick the option which allows you to move as much as you can. But frequency of movement is ideal. That's so just moving around, using your body in a different way than you just had been using it is key, because movement helps stave off a lot of these issues. And then it's kind of like all those other factors that we discussed earlier, which were stress levels and stuff. So noticing like any kind of triggers that have for stress. So, I mean, we're talking about prevention here as well, but that's also important for prevention because it increases pain sensitivity. So, getting your sleep right, God, like, it's so foundational. It's just getting enough sleep and enough good quality sleep will always put your body in a state where it can handle way more than it could if you didn't have that good quality sleep. So it improves your tolerance, improves your resilience, no end. So getting that sleep right will be in and of itself a very potent preventative measure. Nutrition as well. Hydration is such a big one. I've become more, and obviously I'm looking at things when in the initial phases, like from a movement perspective, but I'm even right at the beginning have started asking people about how much water they're drinking or how much hydration they're getting, because your tissues, like, your muscles are like 75% water. Your whole body is arguably it's just a machine to pump water around, essentially. So if you're not getting enough water, your tissue quality is reduced, and you're not able to use your muscles and joints and ligaments and stuff in a way which is supportive. They'll feel like they've got less resilience, and they're more brittle in a sense. So you just will experience more discomfort if you're not well hydrated. And hydration is kind of like individualized in the sense that, everybody says, like, get your 2 liters of water, and it's a good like little benchmark to aim for. But making sure it's not just water, but you're getting those electrolytes in you as well. So, but without getting like trying to focus on the individual too much, more of like a general rule is like, just get enough water and you just drink. And then with nutrition as well is like, before, like, you used that example earlier, the guy who's like just taking tons of supplements but just not taking care of his drinking, is before you even think about like any kind of supplements which could help with pain, like, people think of like glucosamine and stuff like that for joints. It's like, well, what are you doing with your nutrition which could support your joint health, and which would mean that you're trying to prevent as best as possible picking up pain and injury. So getting those nutrition aspect of your nutrition right, and so if you're not sure about those things, get in touch with someone like me, someone like you, to help with those aspects, and just help put a plan in place for getting all that right. So generally, it's like a good first one is movement. Take care of that, because there are ways for you to bake in more movement into your day. And then beyond that is like knowing your stress triggers and managing them, and hydration is like casual for nutrition, and definitely getting enough sleep. And just pick one to start with. If you're listening and you're thinking, this is okay, I'm going to do something, and it can be overwhelming because you think, okay, well, there's this, and this I need to get right. It's like, don't worry about it. What's the one thing that you can do, which you can do, and you will do it, and just run with that, and then build on that. It's okay, cool. I started moving for 5 minutes. Great. I'll build that up to 10. And then it's like, okay, cool. I'm only getting 5.5 hours of sleep. I'm going to try and get an extra half an hour, and then I'll build that up to 7 to 8 over time. So it just starts small. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
As regards to like getting out of pain, I see most people, when they get a little bit of back pain, you see all the time, people in the gym, the first thing they think about doing is to stretch it. We all see the guy that's sitting on his front, pushing his chest off the floor, or the person that's bringing their knee round to the side and rotating. Do you think things like this actually help? And is the lower back tight when people present with pain?
Yeah, that stuff helps if it's what your body actually needs. So the interesting thing, like stretching, for example, is it feels nice, because there's this link between stretching and what the brain is perceiving, which just makes it feel like, oh, this feels good, and this is relieving. But the thing is, if you're stretching and then after 20 minutes it stops working, and that's the case every time you do that, it's not like it's staving off pain. It's not like it's helping you improve the pain symptoms or reduce it or put you out of pain for a longer period of time. It's just like, I get temporary relief, it comes back. I do it again, it comes back. I do it again, it comes back. And stretching is not the thing that you're going to need. It's not actually helping in this case. So even if it feels tight in the lower back and you're stretching it and that's not helping, then that's not the thing that you need. Tightness isn't just a symptom of something needing stretching. It could be a symptom of something that's overly weak as well. And so if you stretch, that thing that is tight because it's weak is just getting weaker. So you're actually making the structures worse and reducing the little support that it already has to keep you clinging on. So the opposite might be necessary. Somebody might actually need to be doing some stability and strength work. And I have a client right now who I'm working with for knees, actually, and default thing to do is just to get into a hamstring stretch, just fold forward and just stretch that. Oh, that feels good. That feels good. It's like the position you can get into suggests you have the length. Your body and your brain lets you get into that length. Stop stretching, because that's not the thing you need. You actually need to build stability and strength. So that was like a what? type of moment. Like, you want me to stop doing that thing that gives me relief? Is like, yes, just trust me on this. Give me a few weeks, and you'll start to realize why. And yeah, lo and behold, this person's starting to feel stronger in their legs. They're starting to feel like there's an important change happening there, and they've been pretty good. Like, they're more disciplined about not stretching as much, because it was such an automatic movement for them that that I had to call it out a couple of times. I'm like, stop it. And then I've noticed that it's happening less and less in the sessions I'm having with this person. So it might not be the thing that you need, and tightness does not mean you need to be stretched. It could mean the opposite, but you only really know that. Like in a self-diagnosis kind of way, you're going to know that because if the thing that you're doing, i.e. stretching, is providing temporary relief, but that's all it gives you, and it doesn't improve anything over time, then you need to stop doing that and get a proper assessment to find out exactly what you need to do.
I'm so glad you said that. I have a love-hate relationship with stretching, because in a sense of it, what that temporary relief is, so certainly in my experience, is your calming central nervous system, which we said will give you temporarily more range because the body has let go. 90% of the time, I feel that most people, when they feel tight, is their body goes, I don't feel safe in this position, using the peg as an example, so I show on screen. So I don't want him to go there. I stretch it, nervous system calms down, I have that range. And as you said, that could open up a can of worms, because there's a reason why my body didn't want me to go there. Yeah. And I also think a lot of these things are overly lengthened. So often people go, well, I can't touch my toes, for example. I must have tight hamstrings. I feel my hamstrings being tight. But I always use that as like a guitar string, right? If a guitar string's like, you're creating like I feel like that guitar string doesn't move very well, you don't want to tighten that guitar string more because it's probably just overly lengthened, it's going to snap. What actually you want to do is create some tautness to that to create some movement and some flexibility. And we spoke earlier on about pelvis position and rib cage position and how those things could help those things out tenfold. And I feel that strength 9 times out of 10 does more than stretching ever will. And I think stretching has its place, but it's more to, okay, we get some temporary range, but now let's go in and strengthen that range and make sure that your brain knows you can get there, and I can get into a position where I can work out what's going to stabilize this position.
Yeah, fully. And I try to stay away from using the word stretching a lot as well. As like because if you're going to do it, you want to do it in a specifically targeted way. Everybody thinks of static stretching is like, talking hamstrings, it's like, okay, I'm just going to pull my leg towards me, hold it for 30 seconds, and then let it go. It's like it has a very specific time and a very specific place to use that particular kind of stretch. And often we're doing movements, we're going to release something in a specific kind of way, not necessarily like that as well. And so I think movement is arguably the kind of the best catch-all term for it as well, because if you get somebody to move through a joint appropriately, that's going to stick as a pattern much more than if you just stretch something out. And the other key thing there as well is like just stretching something out is only literally one half of the equation. You're missing the other half, which is, well, if you're going to release something, you have to activate something else. Otherwise, you're taking away that last bit of stability that your body is trying to cling on to prevent it from going into deeper pain or deeper dysfunction. So it is always like one half of the equation, and you need to look at what the other side of that is.
Yeah, exactly. At worst, it's that, and at best, if you're not going a strengthener or activating something else, you're just going to go back to the way you were before, when your nervous system just goes back to where it was before you started doing the yoga class, right? And yeah. I always show this to people when, because I generally don't move particularly well. Big long femurs don't help either. But trying to I could never touch my toes. And everyone goes, well, you must have tight hamstrings. All right. And I release my masseter, and I do some work on my hip flexor directly, and I do some hip thrusts and actually get my glutes working. And then I can touch my toes. I'm like, I haven't done a single hamstring stretch. I've got my glutes and hamstrings stronger to pull my pelvis down. I've got my hip flexor, which is also overly lengthened before everyone starts stretching that, which everyone does, to pull that pelvis back up the other way. And, the master just allows the, cervical spine to move. And maybe, and I didn't know this, might even have a knock-on effect to the diaphragm, which I didn't even contemplate until just now. And those things have done something, but not a hamstring stretch. And at the very least, if you don't understand what happened and what I did there, it's like, at least it gets you thinking, okay, there's more to this than what I'm initially told.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more to it, and this stuff has moved on quickly over like the last 20-ish years, where the prescription is always like, oh, you just need to strengthen this, or you just need to stretch that. It's like it's got to be done in a specific kind of way for it to have a lasting effect, where it where it's actually meaningful. So yeah, there's definitely more to it.
That's a closing question because I know you've got to shoot off very soon. If someone's wants to get out of this and they want to incorporate the gym in this, and you see a lot of physios will say don't train. They will say don't deadlift for sake of argument. Is there anything that you think is the risk reward benefit isn't worth it? One, and two, is there? I know obviously your gym routine is going to be very individual depending on how people present their symptoms. But is there something you see as common trends, like getting someone stronger hamstrings is going to have a big carryover effect? Is there things that you go, like 90% of the people listening to this probably need to do more of this?
So the way I approach it is, it's like kind of what I said earlier, which was it's going to depend on the individual, because there'll be some people who is like, I do need you to stay away from the gym for a little bit, but rest assured, you start getting this fundamental stuff right, we're going to get you back in the gym as quickly as we reasonably can. And then there's other people who are like, no, actually, you can crack on with some things, with some amendments, and but just make sure you're doubling down on what I'm asking you to do here. So my goal is like, it's not just that you want to, like, sorry, not my goal. The person's goal is like, okay, first and foremost, the biggest thing that's on their mind is pain, like get out of pain. It's like, okay, cool, but how does that translate to the rest of your life? What do you actually want to be doing with yourself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years with being out of pain, right? It's like, okay, I want to do this, and this. Okay, I might want to go climb Kilimanjaro. I want to be able to play with my grandkids and that stuff. It's like, okay, well, if you want to do those things, you want to be in a fit state, you want to be in a healthier state, you want to be stronger, etc. So do you have any other longer term strength goals, fitness goals, health goals and stuff? It's like, yes, actually I do. Invariably, when somebody has been out of action with back pain, is like, I want to lose a little bit of weight as well, and I just want to feel better in my body. And it's like, okay, great. So we can work towards those things. And to be able to work towards those things, you do need to be doing some level of strenuous physical activity. And where I come at it from is, I want to get you in the gym as quickly as reasonably possible. So for some people, that might be a couple of sessions where we're just focusing on the fundamentals. Like, actually, you've got this down. Let's move that into the gym environment now and build you up there. Or some people might be, I need a few weeks at this level, and then we're going to start jumping into the gym. So the thing I'd say is, like, as a general piece of advice, is just do things that don't cause discomfort in the gym, and just crack on with those things. And yeah, technique as well. Technique is king, because I mean, you can speak to this more from that from the strength and hypertrophy perspective as well. But like, stimulus driven by technique is probably going to be better than just loading a pattern, loading yourself up where the technique isn't great, right? So doing it with good technique as best as you can, and just getting in the gym and just staying pain-free, doing pain-free stuff is still going to be relevant for you, still going to be important for you. But take the steps to actually get yourself out of pain as well, so that you aren't limited, you're not constrained in the gym, you can do anything. So I'm not one of those people who's like, you need to completely stop what you're doing. I'm very much like, here's a plan of action for you. This is what I want to help you achieve. And does that sit with where you're at? If the answer is yes, great, that's what we're going to do. If the answer is no, then we're going to try and figure out what is acceptable and stuff. But essentially, it's that get yourself in the gym as quickly as you can, build that strength up, and then just like keep moving onwards and upwards from there. Hope that's a helpful answer. Yeah,
really, really good. So for people who want to find out what you do, either via the online portal, which I'm assuming you probably still do a little bit of, and to see you in Soho, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram. So that's a simple place to find me, is at Gurinder Sandhu Coaching. I won't take 5 minutes spelling that out. I'll just
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, sweet. So yeah, you can find me there. That's probably going to be a good place, because I'm linked to how you can get in touch with me and how you can book appointments with me from there as well. So that's a good place to find me. And yeah, just see if that content vibes with you as well. If anybody needs help, can be found in Soho. So at Untitled Soho, great plush state-of-the-art facility for helping people with achieving their health and fitness goals and getting out of pain and stuff. So I'm happy to see people there as well. And I offer a free initial consultation with people as well. So that 90-minute session where we go in depth into the assessment and then start prescribing you with the exercise that are right for you to get you where you need to be and gain pain-free. That's a free initial consultation. So if anybody wants that, they can come see me in Soho for that, and they can book in via online.
I mean that's awesome. I tell you what, the amount of people I know that I say at your facility, they've got to give me a sponsorship deal eventually. The amount of times it's being plugged on this podcast. But thanks, dude. This has been really, really fun. Good to reconnect, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, 100%, man. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and we'll do it again.
Anytime.
Thank you very much for watching the podcast. If you're like me and like to binge watch podcast episodes, click here for our most recent episode. And if you enjoy the show and want to be updated when new videos come live, click here to subscribe to the channel.